Are you a native of Westfield, Jack?
Yes.
And what brought your parents here?
They were 2 generations ago. They left Sweden and landed in Chautauqua County, and they were builders and that type of thing. And there's a street named after my grandfather because he built all the houses on it, or literally all the houses on it. And everybody wants to talk about one tiny point. On one end of the street, they call it Beckman Avenue, and on the other end of the street, they call it Beckman Avenue, and they're spelled differently.
No kidding.
And that has to do with the 2 extra letters in the Swedish alphabet. And it was BA with the 2 dots over it.
The umlaut, yeah.
Yeah, umpapa.
Yeah. And so then, what did your dad do for a living?
My father was an insurance agent. He had a small insurance agency. And people that remember him remember he had only one hand. He lost a hand, was shot off in 1917.
In World War One.
Yeah.
Where was he stationed in World War One? Was he on the Western Front there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he talk about how that happened?
No. He didn't want to talk about it, and I don't. So. And then he had a brother who was gassed, and got through life without it, but told a story about going to the Veterans Administration, a young doctor in there, and they're doing it, and the doctor says, "Oh my God, we got to get you a meet." And he says, "No," he says, "I was gassed. You've never seen one, have you, from World War One?" Yeah.
So you went to schooling here at Westfield High School.
Yes.
And did you? What year did you graduate?
1948.
So you graduated in 1948. Do you remember December 7th, 1941?
Definitely.
What do you remember about it?
Yeah. For some reason, I remember all the details. Well, I was upstairs on the 2nd floor, and it was before TV, so radio going, and it came in over the radio, and my father was alarmed about it, very alarmed about it, and that was the start. Yeah.
What was the reaction kind of among your neighbors there? All of a sudden this news flash come, you didn't see it coming,
Yeah.
and what was the rumblings?
That part I don't remember, because in 1941, I was only 11, so I don't have too much recollection of that.
Do you remember kind of war efforts, what it was like living here, rations and all that stuff?
Oh, definitely. And I remember the D-Day invasion, and all the church bells rang in Westfield. Everybody knew what it was. About 7 o'clock in the morning here. Yeah.
Did you or your family know of anybody who was lost kind of in the family?
Definitely, yes, yeah. I was active in sports at the Welch Field, which is the place where young people take up their athletic skills, and one of the counselors was killed on D-Day, parachuted down, along with another Westfield resident. Yeah. So.
What did the community do when they got the news of that? Was there church services? Were there anything? Do you remember any?
Different things. They came at different times, you know. So it was a very sad day. Yeah.
Then ultimately VE Day comes, and then VJ Day. Were there commemorations here in Westfield?
Well, I don't remember commemorations on those dates. I mean, obviously everybody was aware of it. But actually I was a summer student at Camp Vinyasa on VJ Day. And the camp made a big thing of the VJ Day.
How so? Did they have singing, salutes, flag? Did anything like that?
Yeah, a lot of patriotic activities. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then you graduate from high school, college. Was that next for you?
Yes, I went directly to Syracuse
The Orange.
and graduated from there in their College of Business Administration, now called College of Management, I believe. And there were a lot of job openings, and I had some offers and took those all seriously, but decided that I want to work for myself. So I returned and took over my father's tiny insurance business and was in that for 17 years.
Sure.
And when I left, I have 21 employees
My golly.
and offices in Westfield, Mayville, Fredonia, Cassadaga. Yeah. So,
Was your interest in politics sort of something natural? Did that come from your parents? Were they interested in politics as well?
most people in Chautauqua County only know about the Beckman side of the family. My grandfather, great-grandfather was Hunt. Those that are in the DeWittville area, why there's one giant tombstone over there. It's about 50 feet tall, and he was sort of the inventor, the technician that launched Gillette Razor Blade Company. And then one of his daughters married a McClellan, and he was a law school graduate and was appointed federal territory judge in the West before it was a state, and his assigned area was Colorado and so on. And he claimed in his papers to personally know Jesse James and so on. So
Wow.
I've got a book over there that I believe is just, I found it when I'm cleaning up things. At my age, you got to get things cleaned up. And it was from Wells McClellan, his library, his tiny law library.
Yeah. So he was in obviously the law business as
Yeah,
well.
he was in the law business, and he was a federal judge.
Yeah. So your interest in Republican politics, did that come naturally from you, or did that come handed down?
I would say both.
Yeah.
I would say both.
So you decided to go into public service, and what was there somebody who was sort of a role model who guided you to get into this area, or just decided?
I think it came natural, and there was a vacancy precipitated by Charles Goodell. He got moved U.S. Senate, and Jim Hastings moved, and Jess President moved, and so there was one at the end. And in 4 days, the committee had to decide who would be the candidate. And I guess I put the best show on to get that nomination.
Now, becoming an assemblyman, of course, you have to travel to Albany, and that impacts your business. Some point, you had to probably sit down with your wife and say, "Hey, guess what I might be doing here?"
Yes. Yeah, that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I had to do that, and it's also the same issues as to why I left after serving 3 terms.
Right. So you ran in 1970. Was it 70? Or?
I ran in 68, 70, and 72.
Got it.
And In my last term, I became chairman of the Select Committee on the state's economy. And among the issues that were handed to me to take care of was the 1980 Winter Olympics. And that was an exciting experience. And I wrote a book, Transition in New York, an 80-some page documentation how the state of New York was losing industry. And the focus for financial development came largely from the financial institutions and the stock exchanges and so on. And the effect was the city of New York and Long Island and Westchester was benefiting greatly by that line of thinking, and upstate was losing its industries. And the purpose of the book was to try to show that. And unfortunately, it came out in an election year, and the Republican team didn't want to spend any time on that subject because they didn't look very good. That's right. Nelson Rockefeller had just completed his terms and gone to Washington in hopes of being president. He took on the role of vice president. So,
yeah, that was quite a transition time period. So there were certainly the Jacob Javits, Nelson Rockefeller, sort of more liberal Republicans, and then there was, I assume, more conservative Republicans.
That's correct. And the parties sort of splintered off a little bit. D'Amato, he primaried Javits and beat him. Nobody thought that was possible, but he showed that there's a strong conservative endorsement at that time. Right. And that's why Charles Goodell lost his U.S. Senate. Right. He misjudged what was going on around the state.
He lost to Buckley, right?
Yes, good. Not many people would remember that. When it's really difficult to think of New York State when there's a strong Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate, that a conservative with just that line could win the U.S. Senate job.
Yeah, that was a funny year.
Yes, it was.
1970. So during that time period, did you ran against, who did you run against for assembly?
A formidable candidate that I ran against was Roland Kidder, and I was fortunate enough to worked hard enough to beat him by about 4,000 votes. And when I retired and he ran again, why, he won by 16,000. So.
Well, that's a credit to you.
I felt good about that. Yeah.
Let's go back to the Olympics for a second. So you're assigned, because of your position in the assembly, to work on the 1980 Lake Placid Olympics.
That's correct.
So talk a little bit about that. That intrigues me.
All right. I want to clear up that I had nothing to do with the athletes and that type of thing.
Sure.
Although they performed well, it was building the infrastructure for it. And Lake Placid had hosted the Olympics in 1936, and when we started, it was kind of thought, for the most part, why what we built in 36 could be used with small modifications. That turned out not to be the case, and we had a lot of work to do. One story I want to tell, that we like to think that we had built different things so that maybe we could set some world records, and one was the 90-meter ski jump. And for people that are not familiar with it, when the skier leaves the 90-meter ski jump, he doesn't land on the ground until the length of a football field. He flies through the air that far. And we had polished up the ski jump, and further improvements in ski wax and so on, so that when they held the Olympics, the first jumpers were going beyond what anybody thought, and they were landing on flat ground almost. That's a good way to break hips, and to land after flying through the air 100 yards. You have to land on something that's tilted so that the back of your skis come down, and then gradually, and that's so they had to stop the ski jump for a short time, and everybody had to get on about 25% closer to the end of the ski jump so that they weren't flying quite so far.
Wow, did not know that.
Yeah.
Any other stories you can think of about that? Preparation for the sites, the location, the infrastructure?
There were enough changes in the sleds that we had to make significant modifications there, and the luge that had to be done over again, and they were both very fast. Yes.
So, though you were out of the assembly, did you watch with interest the 1980 Olympics?
Oh, I was there all the time. Yeah, and my colleagues remembered me.
Oh, that's good. So you're actually in Lake Placid.
Oh, I was in Lake Placid all the while. Yes.
Did you happen to go to the hockey game, Miracle on Ice?
Oh, yeah.
You there?
Yeah. Great experience.
How did you? That's played over and over again. Do you believe in miracles? Did you feel that sense of patriotism that day?
When I walked in, it wasn't on my mind, but it soon became so. I think even the local people and other people from this country were surprised at how the momentum for U.S. team continued to grow as the game went on and on.
Well, it is iconic, and interestingly enough, most people don't remember that was the Russian game was the semifinals.
That's true.
And they assume that was a final, but then they had to win, and the next couple days, and were actually behind. They were behind on the gold medal game, and then had to come back.
Yeah. Yeah. Very exciting.
Well, there you go. I'm glad to be in the presence of a guy who was at such a monumental event.
Yeah.
What did you think when you're being in the Republican Party of Rockefeller? What did you think of Javits? I mean,
well, inherently, I was a conservative Republican, and Rockefeller had done an outstanding job during his early terms. Mm-hmm. And among the things that he did that made him such a good governor, he had outstanding people serving under him in different areas, and he took their advice. The last term that he served before he went to Washington to try to be president, that term was not good. He was no longer relying on really skilled people, and he was using his own beliefs and so on, and how he was going to run the state. And it was not run in the same professional manner as it was in earlier terms when he was relying on real experts in every field.
Malcolm Wilson was the lieutenant governor for a long period of time, wasn't
yes,
he?
And I served for his beginning.
Okay.
Yeah. And he ran for re-election, and he was not an organizer and didn't have the charisma to attract a lot of money and support, and so he lost.
That was to Kerry?
Yes.
Yeah. So after you decided not to run again and you came back here, then you decided to go to law school. What precipitated that?
That's correct. I had strong interest in going to law school when I graduated from undergrad. I didn't have the money, and it looked like too much for me to take on, so And then my interest in the law increased substantially as I served in the assembly. So it wasn't easy to go back in your 40s. You don't pick things up quite like you do when you're in your 20s.
Right.
But we got through it all right.
So would you commute back and forth, or did you stay up there?
No, I commuted.
Well, then when you graduate from law school, did you know that you were just going to hang up your own shingle, or did you work with somebody else?
No, I wanted to go and practice by myself.
Mm-hmm. What were the challenges back then of kind of hanging up your own shingle? Because I suspect most lawyers were kind of sole practitioners, weren't they at the time?
Yes. There were a lot of small offices.
Mm-hmm.
And of course now the trend is to gravitate together and into larger firms. Yeah.
Did you have, in Westfield area here, in this neck of the woods, who were some of the other lawyers that were here at the time?
At that time, there were 5 law firms. Some names will not be remembered, but one was Bob Laughlin, who teamed up with Bard Shack. And I also remember Anthony Rizzo, Roger Hammer, Art Tennant, Elmer Brinkman, lots of attorneys. It's interesting. There's only 2 law firms now in Westfield,
Yeah.
where there was 6 temporarily when I entered. But Westfield was a shopping center for law services,
Mm-hmm.
2 for this general area.
Did you find an area of law that you found more interesting than others, sort of real estate, or was it just a general practice?
Having the experience in government that I had from serving in the assembly, I represented a number of towns, villages, fire districts, and that type of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, the interest in oil and gas drilling was taking hold, and I had taken oil and gas law at law school. Nobody else had that experience, and so I represented 13 different gas companies.
Mm.
And so I was a busy man, and I represented one of the largest banks in the area. I'll leave the name alone.
Okay.
And did all their business for a large geographical area until I retired.
Right. So why the interest in oil and gas development along this area here? Was this the Medina Sands area? Am I getting that correct?
There were some smart geologists that had studied it, and they knew there was a large by Westfield, Chautauqua County standards, deposit of oil and gas. And in contrast to Texas and places like that, where you drill a well, you can produce substantial gas for many, many, many years. The amount of gas and oil that was in the area was not that substantial, so they were really only going to produce, if they go large amount of gas each year, about 10 years is all. There's many wells that are still producing, but they're just inching it out. The amount was not there, with a few exceptions.
So you were really probably in Chautauqua County the go-to guy when it came to oil and gas.
Yeah, that's true.
So what was the challenge, frankly? Because landowners, they were just glad perhaps to get royalties and have an opportunity, but was there something unique and distinctive in Chautauqua County? Because there really was no other experience other than you.
Yes, and the law profession I'm proud to say, represents both sides. And I managed to have my advice published in the American Agriculturalist to benefit the landowner and what they should look out for.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt no problem in representing the landowner too. Sometimes try to stay away from where both sides on me. But if somebody else was drilling a well or looking for leases and so on, why I wouldn't be representing both sides.
Sure.
But I helped a lot of landowners get what they should get out of a good lease.
Now, like everything else, not everybody agrees on everything all the time, so occasionally the litigation ensues. Did you get involved in the litigation aspect of this?
I did. There was not a lot of litigation because it's pretty cut and dried. That law has been around long enough so that things are pretty well established, and if somebody feels that they had been wronged, if they go to somebody that knows what they're going to do, say, you're unhappy, but I got to tell you the law is pretty clear on that, and I can show you some of the law cases that have taken place.
Talk about, one of the things of course, I'm a member of the Northern County Bar as well, and I've seen the composites of the various members of the bar. Were there in the bar, when you were growing up, sort of characters, guys that you just either enjoyed being around or you just knew that they had personalities larger than life?
Oh, yes. I don't think I want to characterize them, but if I wanted to be entertained and I got at a dinner meeting, why, I'd pick where I could really be entertained by some of the members. And there's a lot of little specialties that it was kind of interesting how one attorney would do DWI type defenses and so on, and they were specialized in that area, and it wasn't the kind of practice that interested me. I was worked for municipalities, for individuals.
I'm looking at just a copy of a composite. This is Judge Lee Town Adams. Give me your best Lee Town Adams story. Everybody has one.
Well, Lee was a very bright attorney. He graduated from Yale Law School. He's a little on the liberal side, and he wanted to see every little guy get protected in every situation, and I think he was a good judge. And quite often people in the bar will look at somebody and they say, well, I don't want to vote for him because he's always on the side of the prosecution, and so he's going to lean that way. And Judge Adams was always on the defense side, and he established a good reputation for himself. As far as something unusual, why Judge Adams would be walking around the streets in Mayville on a lunch break and with a book in his hand, wonder he didn't fall down because he was reading the book with understanding. And he went into a place that was, while he was there, it was just a little restaurant, it was being robbed. And he knew he was judge. He said to the person robbing, he said, I command you to drop that gun, and so on. And the guy did, I guess.
That's a great story. I could see it with his voice, he bellowed out there like that. At the time also, now he was the county court judge, was there a Supreme Court judge from our area who was sort of assigned to Mayville?
At that time, yes.
Do you remember who that was?
I'm having trouble. Judge Ricotta more than anybody else, I would say. And Judge Ricotta, of course, was from Dunkirk, New York.
Right.
So,
Was he? I just vaguely remember him, but was he a character also?
in a little bit of,
Yeah.
His background was he worked for the New York State Attorney General's office in Buffalo, and he had a position where he could do a favor, nothing illegal, but maybe change the time of a case when some attorney calls him. And so he made a lot of friends. So that's how he got it.
Charlie Loveland.
Yeah.
I guess he was Charlie, bigger than life, literally and figuratively and literally.
Yeah. Charlie was a bright guy.
Yeah.
He was one of the characters, and he was definitely on the defense side. And he handled some unusual cases and got some startling results with his effectiveness.
Bert Snyder.
He was kind of a growly guy if you were against him. Why?
Sorry.
He was hard to settle a case with because,
Charlie Colasano.
Yeah, he's a little bit like Snyder. Yeah.
I always got the impression he was. I got to know him because just at the very end, because it was Colasano and Summer, and Charlie had retired at the time. But just a guy who never shy about getting up and giving a speech.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd go in the bar association. You'd almost go to sleep. There was nothing to talk about, particularly at the bar association meeting. But he'd get up and start his rant, and he'd get it going.
You mentioned about Mr. Rizzo. Again, vaguely remember him when I started practice. Did he live here in Westfield? Was he? In
Yes,
Westfield?
he lived here in Westfield.
Yeah.
He had been in a partnership with a very active and capable judge, and I'm going way back in time now, Gerald Gibbs. He practiced with him. So he learned the craft from Judge Gibbs and practiced until he was well in his 80s, I believe.
That was Ron Gibbs' dad?
No relation.
No relation at all. I should ask.
But that Gibbs was Gibbs Kearns' relation.
Oh, yeah, Gibbs.
His last name was Kearns because Judge Gibbs' daughter married Kearns.
Okay. Gibbs. I remember so much about Gibbs is his interest in railroads.
Yes.
He had I think either owned or part of the terminal there for a while.
Yes.
Bruce Manley.
Well, I knew Bruce well. Bruce was a natural politician, and Governor Rockefeller liked him and made him an advance man when he was running for president. He never got to the convention, but he had hopes of it, and he was an advance man for Governor Rockefeller in some of the western states, I believe.
There was a female, was it a Schober? In Schober's office, at Manley and Schober, wasn't there a lady attorney early on in the Bar Association?
It's interesting for historical reasons. It used to be, up until approximately 1980, that if you clerked for a attorney and you met certain criteria, you could sit for the bar exam, and if you passed it, you could be admitted without ever going to law school. I believe she was the one that did that, and I don't know who she worked for, where she learned the craft, but I don't think she went to law school. So from that standpoint, And there's still one member of the Bar Association, which I'm not going to mention, practicing today, and he was in the last group that could be admitted to practice without going to law school if he could pass the exam.
Don't recommend that for anybody, even if they could do it, because that's just a tough.
No.
That's a tough one,
Yeah.
tough slog. Albert Foley, the senior,
Yeah.
kind of deep, resonant voice. Did you have much interaction with him?
I did not. You're talking of
Bill Foley's dad.
Bill Foley's dad. No. He had a job in Albany as a draftsman for the Bill Drafting Commission.
Mm-hmm.
So he took the trains to Albany regularly, but that goes back to the 1950s, I believe.
Daly. Is it Bob Daly? Bill Daly?
Bob Daly.
Bob Daly. Did your paths cross with his?
He was primarily criminal defense,
Mm-hmm.
and he also did civil cases. Those are the two things he was noted for, and he was very capable.
Did you have real estate deals? Because I know you did a lot of real estate, Jack, where you'd say a certain individual would all of a sudden be on the other side and say, oh man, this is going to take forever, or you just uniquely tough, or detailed, I shouldn't say tough, just detailed to the point that every I had to be dotted, every easement had to be checked, everything, all of that stuff. Do you remember one or two? I could name names, but just curious whether there was one or two that jumped to mind.
Well, there was one in Jamestown, Erickson.
Yeah, oh, Phil Erickson, absolutely, yeah. Phil Erickson.
Erickson, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yes, you're right, he was tough. Jeez.
there's no one else that I can think of that. But there were some people that definitely had greater knowledge of real estate law than others.
Well, you were one of them. You were very, very noted for all of that. As you reflect back on the practice of law, how did it change during your time period? I mean, you were practicing for a long period of time, Jack. And
Yes.
what did you get a sense of it all? Did it become, some people have said it came from being more professional to kind of more business. Did you get a sense of that trend?
There definitely was a trend, and although people didn't advertise that they had specialties, why they made a reputation in one area or another. If you had a DWI, driving while intoxicated, why there was about 5 or 6, 7 maybe attorneys in the county that really had a strong reputation, and those were literally all the cases gravitated to. And in my case, in oil and gas, a lot of work, somebody would drive maybe 40 miles to engage me with an oil and gas problem. And I handled a lot of business transactions, and that part changed. Less camaraderie than there was back then. When an attorney died in the 60s, maybe the 70s, why the Bar Association would all turn out. They still have such a thing, but the participation has changed substantially.
We at the Jamestown Bar Association, we do have a memorial service for anybody who was a member of the Jamestown Bar, no matter when, they may have been retired many, many years, but we still do that. And
Okay. In response to what you just said, I would point out for people that don't know, Chautauqua County is one of the few in the state that has 2 bar associations. So I lived in the northern Chautauqua area, so
What did you do? Though I'm a member, and I used to have evening dinners, as I recall, when I was participating. Was that the standard? And when you were starting in the practice, did you meet monthly? Were they dinners, lunches? How did you meet?
That's a good description. When I started, and that's another example of the change that occurred over time. And so maybe you'd sit down and somebody would sit to you that you really didn't know well, or handle a different area of the law. And so there was a better camaraderie back then.
Going to ask you to give me your best Peter Clark story.
Best what?
Peter Clark story. No more of a character than Peter Clark.
I don't think I have any Peter Clark stories. He was quite often the master of ceremonies at our annual dinners and that type of stuff. And he had his own style of what was funny and what was great stories to tell for fun. And I guess I wasn't into that. It doesn't mean I'm right and he's wrong. It just wasn't the thing that turned me on. And so, he'll always be remembered for that.
Some of the judges at the time, going way back, was the Rollin Fanchers, Ed O'Connors, were any of those part of your world?
They were easing out, retiring about the time that I entered, so I didn't have a lot of reaction with them. I knew them, and like Judge Fancher, why he was held in very, very high regard. Mm-hmm. I've forgotten what other names you had mentioned.
Ed O'Connor.
Oh, there was a character. I used to go fishing with Ed out on Lake Erie.
Did you?
And to show you what a different times, why that's when the district attorney could also practice law, and he might be prosecuting somebody for a crime one day, and his wife would come in and get a real estate transaction done the next day, you know.
Well.
Yeah, and he has one case that's in the law books about, I can't remember much of the details, but the danger of too overcharging based on activities, and that was the Malesko case. I mean, you may.
What do you remember about that, if anything?
Oh, it was a bad case, and Malesko was not a good person, mm-hmm. but O'Connor made him look like the worst person that ever lived on the face of the earth. And they said, you know, this is so biased that the jury can't possibly not hear all that and not give you a conviction. And so it's in the law book, stands for that proposition.
No kidding. So O'Connor was the judge then?
No, O'Connor was the district attorney then.
Oh, really? McKinley Phillips, was he part of that then too?
Yes. McKinley was a quiet, studious judge, and he presided, I think, more in family court and those type of things than the public associates judge with who handled what murder case and those type of things. That wasn't the kind of thing that Judge McKinley did, but he was a very effective judge.
You remember when Robert Jackson died? Was that part of up here in Westfield? Was that even notable?
No, I'm blessed. I've done a lot of things, including I've been to the courtroom where he presided following World War II.
Were you in Nuremberg?
Yes.
Wow.
I've been there and heard the lecture in there and so on. but I don't really have any recollection of when he was practicing here.
What's the story I should be asking Jack Beckman? As you knew I was coming out today, you'd say, wonder if Greg's going to ask that question or that I've yet to ask.
No, I thought it might be something to do with politics.
Yeah.
But
well, talk about politics a little bit. I mean, you merely, when you left the assembly, you did not lose your interest in Republican politics.
I became Republican county chairman.
Yeah.
And I became very good friends of one of my colleagues from the assembly that I identified as his talent before he got there, and became the state chairman. And I kept in regular contact with him.
Who was that?
You saw his picture in the other room.
Oh, yeah.
Tom Reynolds.
Yeah, Tom Reynolds. Yep.
An interesting story why he lives in Springville, which everybody knows is a small town up towards the edge of Erie County. And he was fairly new as state Republican chairman. And he said, I've got a candidate for Attorney General of the state of New York. And who do you have up in the Buffalo area? And he named a young attorney in the tiny town of Brant, New York. And he says, that's my candidate and he's going to win. And nobody could believe he could possibly win. And he got him through the state of New York, and he won the Attorney General as a Republican. Went from a tiny, tiny town in upstate New York.
That's power.
That's power.
What was his name? Do you remember his name?
Something like Vecchio or something.
Oh, yeah, Dennis Fackel.
Vacco.
Dennis Fackel, yeah.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that story.
I was Republican county chairman for Chautauqua County for a short term, but I found it to be very, very time consuming and a lot of heavy obligation to go with it.
Right.
Most people don't understand the amount of work that goes with that. And I would predict, I'm not in it at all anymore, but I still follow it, and I would predict that 2021 is going to be a year of substantial changes within politics and leadership of politics in Chautauqua County.
Yeah.
I was not in the military. I'm blessed to be here in good health. I had a broken neck when I was 18 in an accident.
Oh my gosh.
So, compressed fracture. And so I could never serve.
Yeah. This is way off the beaten path, but there were several people from the Westfield area who were involved in stock car racing. This has nothing to do with anything in life. Was that of interest to you? Was that something you had friends that were interested in, State Line or Erie's or the dirt tracks that used to be around here? There used to be a dirt track on Route 5 here.
I'm almost hesitant to get in this. I actually was a sponsor of a stock car trophy.
Really?
And they raced for that trophy when I was in the assembly. And I never knew anybody else that got involved in that. And I met somebody like 30, 40 years later, and they said, I still got your trophy. And I said, what trophy? And he told me, oh my God, you still have the trophy. You must have been a fast driver, a good driver.
Was this at State Line? Or?
Over by Bustye.
Yeah, State Line. Yeah.
State Line. Yeah. The Sportsman's Trophy,
Was it?
which is a class of car racing, sportsman.
Well, here's what I'm going to do for you, Jack. My good friend who I will see at 1:30 today is named Randy Anderson. Randy Anderson's the chairman of the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame, but most importantly, a huge race car historian. So I'm going to have him track that story down, the Beckman Trophy.
Yeah, it would have been in the early 1970s.
Yeah. All right, I'm on it.
All right.
I'm on it. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time, Jack.
Thank you.
This has been terrific.